doesn't lie. Metadata says who contacted who, when, and for how long.
Kirk Wiebe, if you could talk about that, and also if you would share with us your own story. You yourself subjected, well, your whole family subjected to a day-long armed raid by federal authorities. But respond on that issue of metadata as a former intelligence.
Yes, Amy. Ben captured it very nicely. It is true that in terms of speed and comprehension, comprehensiveness, if you will, metadata provides an opportunity to assess the activities of a targeted person or entity much more rapidly. And therefore, and because it's machinable, the world operates on metadata. It is exactly how data is moved. When you dial a phone number, we say dial. When we punch up a phone number, instantly almost, the other end is ringing, the person intended to receive the call. This is true of email. In seconds, it arrives at the person's inbox when things are working right. So the speed, the opportunity for speed in comprehension of what a targeted entity is doing is enormous. And especially if you watch it daily over time, you can actually then begin to paint a picture of a person's lifestyle, where they are. Because it's not just phone calls, it's bank deposits. It's credit card swipes at the gas station, at the flower shop when a man's on the way home and buys flowers for his wife. It's the Easy Pass transponder that measures or knows what ramp you got on a toll road. You amass this data. You have time hacks of every place an individual is when they do those things. So every time you touch an electronic system, there's droppings left. There's a record that can be exploited.
And your own story, Kirk Wiebe?
Yes. I have mixed emotions about it because my job is not to destroy NSA by any means. I was a member of a proud agency that had some black marks on its past in terms of spying on Americans, but we had been assured that was never going to happen again after the Church Committee. And we had guidelines under UCID 18, which said, thou shalt not spy on Americans except upon probable cause shown to a judge that there's evidence of wrongdoing, criminality, terrorism, or whatever. So everything seemed to be copacetic, congruent with the Constitution, and it was a fun place to work on true targets of concern. In the latter part of my career, when I met up with Bill Binney, Ed Loomis, ultimately Tom Drake, and of course Diane Rourke from the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, that had been my experience. One was very positive, and I was awarded for my work. But then we began to see the agency's intent on exploiting the digital age. And the digital age takes various forms. We talk about Facebook, we talk about the internet, telephone, personal devices of every kind, iPods that can communicate now. So there's a plethora of means of communication, all important to sort out for national intelligence purposes, but focused on foreign threats and domestic if there's evidence that they exist. And that was the philosophy, that was the approach, and that's what we built our original prototype system to work against in terms of analyzing big data. There needed to be a way to look into big data quickly for assessment purposes and be able to, as quickly as possible, home in on that fertile territory, that data connected with legitimate terrorist criminality and so forth. When we found out that the NSA was directing resources against Americans without probable cause, this was late in 2001, just prior to surrounding the events of 9/11, which happened concurrently as this technology was blooming. 9/11 really served as a marker that we had failed as an agency. We had been trying to get the NSA to lean forward, if you will, in its digital seat, to get tools into the fight with all this digital data and find terrorism and so forth. And we had an opportunity to put it out there 9 months before 9/11. Bad culture inside the building and bad process that managers are supposed to ensure does not happen, defeated the small successful prototype and approach that embodied the principles of the Fourth Amendment in it. And it was eliminated in favor of Trailblazer. Well, when 9/11 happened and we failed, and the project that we had been developing called Thin Thread was not adopted, we felt we had no other things to do at NSA. And since 3 of us were eligible for retirement, we retired, formed a small company, and tried to bring the concepts of Thin Thread to other agencies in the government. We succeeded in demonstrating its capabilities in a government contract with Boeing Company in 2004. But a high executive in the agency that contract serves said, we have to stop these guys. They're going to embarrass NSA. Because we had found things in a set of data that 2 agencies had that NSA had not. And that was embarrassing. So that contract was stopped. We then found another contract at Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Patrol. We found some news-breaking data there about an operation involving Iranian businesses importing electronics to support the building of triggering devices for IEDs. And we found that, and this is not classified, this data, this fact was actually broadcast publicly by the Department of Commerce to U.S. businesses, putting them on alert that certain people, individuals, and businesses were trying to import electronics to build triggering devices for IEDs to be used against our troops abroad and coalition forces. We simply, Bill Binney and I, sat down, used Google at home on our spare time to formulate a profile of these businesses, where they were, how they were functioning, and it turned out they were all false fronts to cover up the import operation. We connected the dots for the government, reported it to Customs and Border Patrol, where we were working. They took the data and briefed it up the line, and within 2 weeks we were let go from our contract. I guess we had embarrassed too many people. Long story short, 2 years later, 7 gentlemen, shouldn't call them gentlemen, 7 people are arrested in Florida by the FBI associated with this import operation. We were pleased that we could contribute, even if not officially, in an official position for the government. But as far as NSA was concerned, we launched an IG complaint in 2002 talking about gross mismanagement and fraud, not so much fraud, but more about gross mismanagement.
That was an Inspector General report.
Yes.
And so what happened, we've had Bill Binney on, and he talked about the federal authorities coming in, raiding his home. He's got a gun up against his head as he's in the shower, his kid and his wife. They're all under the gun. What about you, Kirk Wiebe?
Right. Well, as Bill told you, we were raided in 2007. In fact, it was July 26th at 9 a.m. in a coordinated strike against me, Bill Binney, Diane Rourke, the HIPSI staffer, and Ed Loomis. Right. And they came to my home. I was actually sitting at my computer looking out the window, and I noticed about a dozen or so FBI agents coming across my yard in the dark blue uniforms with the gold letters FBI on their backs. And immediately a chill went up my spine. I said, uh-oh, to myself, and I ran to the front door because I didn't want them to break in the door. Not that they had an intention to, but I didn't know that at the time. So I opened the door. The lead agent showed me his badge to identify himself and a search warrant. They asked me who else was in the house. My mother-in-law was, along with my eldest daughter. They were still up sleeping. And they asked me to get them downstairs and have them sit on the couch in the front room. They asked me if I had any pets. I said, yes, I have 2 dogs. They asked me to lock those in the bathroom. My youngest daughter and wife had already left the house on an errand and didn't know any of this was happening at the time. And they entered. And they asked me, they didn't ask me, they escorted me to the outside deck. This was July, it wasn't cold. And babysat me there for the next 7.5 hours while this group of about 12 or so agents went through the house, documenting everything they found, rummaging through papers, taking computers, anything with a digital memory, gathering it up, putting it into, they had about 5 or 6 vans, unmarked white vans out in my driveway. Piled all that stuff in the vans, took printers, a whole bunch of stuff, and left. Now, while this was going on, my wife comes home with my youngest daughter. They see all these vans lined up in the driveway. I have a 400-foot driveway because my home is on a flag lot. It actually sits behind other homes that are street side. So it's a long driveway, and that was lined with vehicles, FBI vehicles. They were worried something had happened to me, maybe medical or whatever. The FBI explained what had happened and took them in, set them on the couch at the same time. Now, they did not have guns drawn. And people, you know, I've thought about why were they drawn when they went to Bill Binney's house. And the only difference I can think of is the fact that Bill had at one time been a registered owner of firearms. He doesn't have them anymore, but he was at one point, and probably the FBI does a check on the database to see if the person they're targeting for a raid has weapons in the house or not, is my guess. And it's a safety procedure for those teams. But that's kind of what happened.
You were never charged?
No, never charged.
Why?
No, not at all.
Well, I wanted to go to Ben about another key question I had about the report, encryption. Supposedly encryption is a safeguard for ordinary Americans, businesses, and others who might want to protect their privacy on the internet. This report basically urges the government not to continue to undermine encryption and to instead seek to strengthen it. Your sense of the report's recommendations on the encryption issue.
This is really important. This comes out of an important article that the New York Times published about an NSA program called Bull Run, where we learned that the NSA, even as part of its mission is to secure the internet, secure communications, protect us from cyber attacks by strengthening encryption, was simultaneously undermining systematically encryption standards around the world so that its spies could break into these communications. The problem is, a backdoor for the NSA is a backdoor for everyone else too. It's a backdoor for hackers. It's a backdoor for China. It's a backdoor for criminals. There's a fundamental tension between this cybersecurity mission, which is to defend the country and the safety of communications, and the aggressive spying mission. And the NSA had fundamentally favored the spying and surveillance mission over the security mission in a way that put all Americans and really all the world's communications at risk. So if this recommendation is adopted, I think it's a very important one.
In its report, the NSA review panel suggested the NSA is engaging in cyber attacks on financial systems or accounts. The panel recommended, quote, government should not use surveillance to steal industry secrets to advantage their domestic industry. 2, government should not use their offensive cyber capabilities to change the amounts held in financial accounts or otherwise manipulate the financial systems. Ben Weisner, can you explain?
I don't know what to say, except I guess why I would, you know, This is a response to everyone who says that all of these programs are about terrorism. Look, there are not a lot of terrorists. There's not enough terrorism in the world to justify these tens of billions of dollars that are being spent to build these massive systems that don't target people but sweep up all of the world's communications. Clearly, there has been mission creep in what the NSA is doing. They're collecting the information because they can. They are allowing their capabilities to drive their policy instead of our laws and values to constrain our capabilities.
I want to go to Edward Snowden in his own words. In his interview with The Guardian's Glenn Greenwald, Snowden said he knew the risks he faced when he became a whistleblower.
You can't come forward against the world's most powerful intelligence agencies and be completely free from risk, because they're such powerful adversaries that no one can meaningfully oppose them. If they want to get you, they'll get you in time. But at the same time, you have to make a determination about what it is that's important to you. And if living unfreely but comfortably is something you're willing to accept, and I think many of us are, it's the human nature. You can get up every day, you can go to work, you can collect your large paycheck for relatively little work against the public interest, and go to sleep at night after watching your shows. But if you realize that that's the world that you helped create, and it's going to get worse with the next generation and the next generation who extend the capabilities of this sort of architecture of oppression, you realize that you might be willing to accept any risk. And it doesn't matter what the outcome is, so long as the public gets to make their own decisions about how that's applied.
Former NSA contractor Edward Snowden, Kirk Wiebe, worked for the NSA for 32 years. Did he have, once Edward Snowden realized what was going on, what were his options and what protections, Kirk, did he have? You wrote a piece, Who Broke the Law, Snowden or the NSA? Was Edward Snowden protected as a NSA contractor?
No, not at all. First, realize.
Ooh, we seem to just have lost Kirk Wiebe on satellite. But let me then go to Ben Weisner and ask. I think we have Kirk back. Kirk, are you there?
Yes.
Yes. Did he have another option?
No, he did not. It's important to realize first that there are no formal whistleblower protections for members of the United States intelligence community. Not just NSA, but DIA, CIA, all of the components of intelligence in the government structure. None of those employees have formal whistleblower rights. Now, are there any logical paths one could take? Yes. The Inspector General, there's one at the NSA, but if you believe the director of NSA is, at least in part, a culprit in the wrongdoing, that IG works for him. So if you really want to put the director of NSA on report as having made high-level decisions playing in this whole privacy issue, you must then go above the director of NSA, which is the IG resident with the U.S. Department of Defense, since NSA is an agency subordinate to the DOD. And that's what we did. We did the 2002 complaint to DOD IG, even though that report was heavily classified and really very few people saw it. It was designed to be buried because it was very embarrassing to the NSA. So it didn't, the IG function really was no function. So if you think Snowden had a path through the IG, he didn't. These things are there. They're almost cosmetic. There are investigations, lots of reports written, but they're buried, hidden from public view when they don't come out favorably.
And Ben Weisner, the little time we have left on Ed Snowden's request for a permanent asylum in Brazil and his options right now. Could you talk about that?
Well, I think the press got a little carried away in interpreting that letter to Brazil. Let me give a little context for it. Snowden has been getting requests from Brazilian senators and, in fact, members of parliaments from around the world to provide direct assistance with their investigations of the NSA spying and their own country spying. What he meant to communicate with that letter is, I support your reform efforts. You need to understand that I'm living under a temporary grant of asylum halfway around the world right now. If I get permanent humanitarian status in Brazil or elsewhere, I'll be in a better position to assist with those reform efforts to the extent that it's lawful and appropriate. No one should think that he would cooperate in those investigations any way differently than he's cooperated with journalists. He will only provide information that is in the public interest. He's not trying to tear down systems altogether. He's trying to reform them.
And what about the debate within the Obama administration now about whether to grant an amnesty? Talk about who's on what side.
Isn't that interesting? You know, I watched the same 60 Minutes report that you're talking about, where you had two top NSA officials, one of them saying, we need to sit down with this guy and have a conversation that might include amnesty in exchange for his cooperation, and then his boss saying, no way, we can't negotiate with hostage takers.
Keith Alexander, the head of the NSA.
Sure, although, of course, the government negotiates with hostage takers all the time. But leaving that aside, I do think that there are camps within the government, those who recognize that Snowden is not out to tear down the United States, that he actually could be useful for reform, that conversations with him could improve everyone's situation. And I hope that the events of this week, the judge's ruling that the program is unconstitutional, the president's panel coming back and saying that sweeping changes are necessary, will strengthen the people in the administration who want to treat Edward Snowden as something other than a felon.
And Richard Leggett explained who he is, the significance of him saying that he actually would support amnesty, that the United States, the government, doesn't even know what Edward Snowden has, a grave concern to the U.S.
So they say. Richard Leggett, who is a senior NSA official and who is in charge of the task force that is trying to assess what Snowden took or how much or the harm, he threw out the figure that there might be 1.7 million documents that were taken. It's incredible that on the one hand they can say that a contractor walked out the door with 1.7 million documents, and on the other hand their audit systems are so effective that no one can commute abuses. Those two things simply don't compute. But the fact that he was floating this balloon, that maybe we should have a different kind of conversation with Snowden, I will just say in response, I don't think a lot of members of the intelligence community watch your show, Amy, that if they're listening, they know where to find us, and they know that we're willing to have a useful and productive conversation with them.
I guess the question is for everyone, whether you're broadcasting or you're at home, are they listening?
That's exactly right.
Ben Weisner, I want to thank you for being with us. Edward Snowden's legal advisor, ACLU attorney, director of the ACLU's Speech, Privacy, and Technology Project. And also want to thank Kirk Wiebe, retired from the National Security Agency, where he worked for more than 32 years. What a story he told us about himself, about what happened to his family when he raised deep concerns about issues of privacy. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for watching this report from Democracy Now!, your daily independent global grassroots news hour. We don't accept advertising or corporate funding, but rather rely on donations from viewers like you. Please make your contribution by visiting democracynow.org today. We need your support today to keep bringing you this hard-hitting, in-depth reporting.